Today, a man arrested and 4 people, including a police officer, injured after a crash and stabbing in Sydney South.
The person of interest has been arrested. There is no threat to the community.
The Country Liberal Party sweeps to power in the Northern Territory after 8 years in opposition. A new report shows drug overdose deaths in Australia have almost doubled over the past 20 years.
Back goes Lakey on the run.
And the Sydney Swans claim the AFL Minor Premiership in a 31-point victory over the Crows. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ruby Cornish. The Country Liberal Party has claimed victory in the Northern Territory, ending 8 years in opposition.
Tomorrow is the start of a new day and a new chapter.
The new Chief Minister, Leah Finocchiaro, led the party from just 2 seats in 2016 to at least 15 in yesterday's election. Chief Minister Eva Lawler conceded defeat after the loss of several seats in Labor strongholds, including her own in Drysdale. Her next steps will be watched closely by those in Central Australia, where crime is on the rise and cost of living pressures are impacting some of the nation's most vulnerable. Reporter Charmaine Allison joins us now from Alice Springs. Hi Charmaine, what results did we see in the southern seats last night?
Well, I think we're still reeling a bit after last night's results. We headed into the vote count expecting it to be a close race between the two major parties, but in the end, the CLP came out victorious. There were certainly nerves around 2 bush seats in particular, Barkly and Namatjira. Both of those seats were held by very slim margins, just a handful of votes before last night. Now, in the seat of Barkly, we saw that the CLP's Steve Edgington retained the seat, and he's currently about 59 votes in the lead ahead of Labor. Meanwhile, in the neighbouring southeast seat of Namatjira, the CLP's Bill Yan has also held on to his seat. He's currently about 700 votes ahead, and that's about a 12% swing towards him, so certainly some good news for him there. Meanwhile, looking at Alice Springs, the local seat of Breitling, CLP's Joshua Burgoyne has held on to his seat, but he faced some powerful opposition in the local Greens candidate, Asta Hill. She's currently about 46% of the two-party preferred vote, so she's had a very strong performance in this year's election. Looking in the neighbouring seat of Araluen, independent Robin Lamley has also retained her seat. She currently has had a 14.8% swing towards her. And finally, in the bush seat of Gwaja, which takes up the west half of the Northern Territory, the former Deputy Chief Minister, Chancey Paik, has retained his seat. He has about 70% of the two-party preferred vote, but he was one of the few to hold on to his seat for Labor at last night's vote count.
And Charmaine, what kinds of issues has the CLP promised to address?
Well, of course, crime is number one. That has been the real centrepiece of the CLP's campaign, particularly in Alice Springs, where we've already seen 2 snap curfews called so far this year in response to violent incidents in the streets of the town. Now, the CLP has promised to take a tough-on-crime approach to this issue. Now, this includes lowering the age of criminal responsibility back to 10, building more prisons, toughening bail laws, and also reinstating mandatory alcohol rehab. Now, there are some in the community who support this approach. They say a tough-on-crime approach is needed, but there are many others who say there needs to be more attention towards the underlying issues behind crime in the region. Now, this includes a lack of housing, healthcare, education, employment, and youth services, as well as extreme poverty and neglect in remote Aboriginal communities. It also includes rising rates of domestic and family violence, as well as drug and alcohol addiction. So certainly some complex issues there, and some calls for the CLP to not just implement snap measures, but to actually look at long-term measures to address these issues for the time to come.
Charmaine Allison, Alice Springs, thank you for that update. The number of drug overdose deaths in Australia has almost doubled in 2 decades. The Pennington Institute report has found there were more than 2,300 drug-induced fatalities in 2022, 80% of which were unintentional. Almost 3/4 of the deaths involved 2 or more types of drugs, and opioids were the most commonly associated with unintentional deaths. Advocates are calling for a national prevention strategy to curb the spike in drug-related deaths.
The overdose toll is continuing to increase, and so it's actually been more than the road toll for nearly 10 years now. That's the sort of scale of the problem, but it's not talked about very much, and it's possibly not talked about, I think, because of the stigma and shame that we've got around drug use issues generally. If you look at it from a population perspective, it's the second or third leading cause of death for men and women in their 20s, 30s and 40s. There's been a massive increase amongst people in their 50s, but it's really touching people from all walks of life. And it's about the same now between regional and rural Australia and the cities. So, and you know, most overdoses happen at home. So it's not something that's in the public square nearly enough, but we're losing people at an extraordinary rate.
German police have arrested a suspect following a knife attack at a community festival which killed 3 people and wounded 8. German media is reporting the man handed himself into a police patrol, stating, "I'm the one you're looking for." The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for orchestrating the attack in Western Germany. Police spent the day conducting a manhunt and made 2 other arrests in connection with the attack.
We do not allow ourselves to be divided in times like these. We stand together and do not allow such a terrible attack to divide society. We will work very closely with the federal police to stand by and support them.
Billionaire founder and CEO of the Telegram messaging app, Pavel Durov, has been arrested in France, according to French media. The reports say Mr. Durov was arrested in connection with an investigation into the lack of moderation on social media networks, which police say allows criminal activity to take place. Pavel Durov has been in exile from Russia since 2014 after he refused to censor opposition voices on the Russian-language social media platform VK. French police have arrested a 33-year-old man suspected of trying to set a synagogue ablaze in southern France. About 200 police officers had been searching for the suspect after a number of entry doors were lit on fire, as were several nearby cars. A police officer was injured. Several others inside the synagogue were unharmed. The French President and Prime Minister have condemned the attack, calling it an act of terror.
I want to say here that we have avoided an absolute tragedy, but what happened here shocks and scandalises all Republicans in our country, because the reality is that once again, French Jews have been targeted, attacked because of their beliefs.
Italian authorities investigating the sinking of a luxury yacht off Sicily have opened a manslaughter case. 7 people died when the vessel went down on Monday, including British tech entrepreneur Mike Lynch and his 18-year-old daughter Hannah. The Public Prosecutor's Office says the probe is not aimed at any individual person, but they are looking into potential crimes of negligent shipwreck.
The Public Prosecutor's Office has opened a case against unknown persons, hypothesising the crimes of culpable shipwreck and multiple homicide. But we are only in the initial phase of the investigation. For me, it is likely the offences were committed, but it's now a question of who committed them.
4 people, including a police officer, have been injured in a stabbing following a crash at Engadine, south of Sydney. Our reporter Sarah Gerrithy joins us now from the scene with more on this unfolding story. Hi Sarah, what do we know?
Look, this morning, I should say, about 9 o'clock, multiple people called 000 after a 2-car crash, which you can probably see behind me at the intersection of Princes Highway and Old Bush Road at Engadine. Now, terrified witnesses have described a man in a blood-stained shirt banging on their windows as they were in their cars, and police say that when they arrived, this man was running from the scene of the crash. The ABC has obtained videos which show police with a taser in their hands pedestrians, demanding that the man get to the ground. In another video, you can see a police officer chasing the man down the street as he runs away, and a third shows him pinned to the ground under arrest. Now, a police officer sustained serious lacerations to his wrist in this incident, and we also know that a woman who was the passenger in one of the cars behind me was also injured, suffering stab wounds. Now, a fourth person has also been injured in this incident. It's not yet clear how they are related or what role they played in the crash, but certainly 4 people seriously injured, and the scene behind me still obviously being examined by police this morning. The police minister, Yasmin Catley, has said there is no ongoing threat to the public.
That investigation is underway. I've been advised that the person of interest has been arrested. There is no threat to the community, so I just want the community to know that there is no threat whatsoever.
And those cars and emergency services clearly still on the scene there, Sarah. What's this doing to traffic in the area?
Well, look, the Princes Highway is closed in both directions from Farnell Avenue to Heathcote Road. We had a little bit of trouble getting here. The back roads are obviously fairly clogged with traffic, so police are saying avoid the area and allow some extra time for your journeys today. It looks like the road will be closed for some time.
Sarah Gerthy at Engadine in Sydney. Thank you for that update. NASA says 2 Americans stuck on the International Space Station won't be able to return to Earth until next February. The US Space Agency decided to abandon hopes of returning the astronauts aboard Boeing's Starliner space capsule when major problems with its thrusters developed on its way to the station.
The start of a mission that was supposed to last just 8 days on the International Space Station.
Lots of cheering here in the room, big hugs.
But NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams have now found out their stay has been extended to a total of 8 months.
Getting a beautiful view now of Starliner.
Boeing's Starliner spacecraft they arrived on has been deemed too risky to take them home, so it will come back with no one on board, and they'll return to Earth in a SpaceX capsule instead.
Space flight is risky, and so the decision to keep Butch and Sonny aboard the International Space Station and bring the Boeing Starliner home uncrewed is a result of a commitment to safety. Our core value is safety.
And liftoff of Starliner.
This was the first test flight for Boeing's Starliner spacecraft with a crew on board. But it had problems with some of its thrusters and several helium leaks, which delayed docking. Engineers at Boeing and NASA have spent months trying to overcome these technical issues, but they couldn't fix them, so instead they've turned to SpaceX. But because of scheduling, it means the astronauts won't return until February next year.
It's disappointing that they're not coming home on Starliner, but that's okay. It's a test flight. That's what we do. They knew those risks going in, but we keep them very busy. There's a lot of science and research going on the International Space Station.
In a statement, Boeing said, "We continue to focus first and foremost on the safety of the crew and spacecraft. We're executing the mission as determined by NASA, and we're preparing the spacecraft for a safe and successful uncrewed return." NASA has emphasised its commitment to Boeing's spacecraft. They say they're certain it will fly again.
Go forward into Starliner.
But for Butch and Sonny, their stay in space continues.
Every year, tens of thousands of people in Japan die alone, and sometimes their bodies aren't discovered for weeks, months, or even years. Many are elderly and have been cut off from their communities and are without friends or family. As Japan's aged population rises, attention is now focused on supporting the most vulnerable.
This is grim work, but someone's got to do it. Takuya Shiota has come to clean up a lifetime of possessions after the elderly resident in this apartment died. With no friends or family, the occupant was undiscovered for 3 weeks until her rent went unpaid.
The deceased passed away here, and the smell was quite strong because of the fluids that came out of her body. So we cut out all here and disinfected it.
Japan's suffering from a lonely deaths crisis. For the first time, the government has crunched the numbers. It's now expected some 68,000 people will die alone this year and left undiscovered for a prolonged period.
It's increasing considerably. We do roughly more than 100 cases a year.
Japan is getting older. Its population shrinking. Once bustling suburbs and villages are emptying, and elderly people are left vulnerable. It was 20 years ago when Dr. Osamu Yamanaka opened a clinic in one of Yokohama's poorest suburbs. Back then, 4 people a day were dying at home alone, many undiscovered for long periods.
Some were skeletal if no one found them. I was young, and I thought it was unforgivable.
Dr. Yamanaka pioneered home care.
There aren't many people who are willing to deal with people from the lowest strata of society, but he is willing to come to me. I appreciate it.
If I wasn't doing it, there would be an awful lot of lonely deaths.
Services like this are now much more common across Japan, but there will always be limitations. Dr. Yamanaka says communities need to fill the gap.
If they do not socialise with their neighbours, they will end up with a solitary death. It's very difficult to prevent it.
It's a challenge Yoshiko Sato has accepted. At her massive apartment complex on Tokyo's outskirts, there are almost 400 elderly residents living alone. Today, she's visiting one of them. Yoshiko Sato set up a Zero Lonely Deaths program 2 decades ago.
Every year, 4 or 5 people died alone. It was like that constantly.
It established a network of volunteers that check up on local residents, leading to a remarkable improvement in the quality of life.
She usually visits me about once a week. I look forward to cooking with the vegetables she brings me. It's what makes my life worth living.
Yoshiko's mission of Zero Lonely Deaths was soon achieved.
After 5 years, the number of lonely deaths became 0 for the first time.
But she worries about the future. A future where people are becoming more withdrawn from their community.
A community must be built by everyone, but that's not possible in Japan at the moment. People are becoming selfish.
If everyone was more considerate of the people around them or looked after them, there would definitely be no more lonely deaths.
This is a crisis that's only going to get worse. Japan has the world's oldest society, with 1 in 10 people aged over 80. And as the country continues to grow old, there's increasing pressure on the government to do more to care for the vulnerable in life and in death. For those on the front line, government support for community groups is a priority.
There is data that loneliness is the biggest factor in shortening life expectancy. In Japan, there's a lack of community ties. I feel it's very common.
A need to keep connections until the inevitable end. James Oaten, ABC News, Tokyo.
Police are seeking several men over a fatal stabbing of a 28-year-old man in Melbourne's west. Several men were seen running from a park in Derrimut, and a man with stab wounds was spotted by witnesses. Detectives spent yesterday combing the park for evidence and found several knives. No arrests have yet been made. Residents in the New South Wales Hunter region have been warned to expect small aftershocks after a second earthquake in 2 days. The 4.5 magnitude quake struck near Muswellbrook yesterday afternoon. A slightly stronger 4.7 quake shook the area on Friday. The latest tremor left thousands of homes without power and water, but there were no reports of major infrastructure damage or injuries. An employee's right to disconnect and a gig worker's status are part of sweeping changes to fair work legislation that comes into effect tomorrow. Australian workers will be able to refuse unreasonable communication with their employers outside work hours. And gig workers will now be classed as employee-like, meaning businesses must consider the legal status and rights of workers more carefully. Industrial relations expert John Buchanan says it's a step in the right direction.
Probably one of the biggest gaping holes in our system of labour law is between what's called independent contractors and employees. And this has been an area of profound uncertainty and basically a massive get-out-of-jail-free card for many employers. Now, this law says they're creating a whole new category of work. to try and get around this problem of whether you're an employee or whether you're a contractor. It actually says if you are working off a platform, if you have the characteristics of a gig worker, you have basic entitlements which will be determined by the Fair Work Commission. But once again, these are basic entitlements for pay. There is some capacity for penalty rates if you're working outside of standard hours. But this is all to be determined by the Fair Work Commission.
Let's get sport headlines now with Daniela Intili.
The Swans have finished on top of the AFL ladder to clinch their first minor premiership since 2016. Despite resting some key players, Sydney soundly defeated Adelaide by 31 points at the SCG. There were 11 goal kickers for the Swans, who won 8-13-121 to 13-12-90. It's the club's 10th minor premiership in VFL-AFL history and third under coach John Longmire. Sydney will now host either Geelong or Crosstown rival the GWS Giants in a home qualifying final in 2 weeks' time. The Crows finished their season in 15th place. The Brisbane Lions have clinched 5th place and secured a home final after beating Essendon by 20 points at the Gabba. The Lions led by 46 points in the final term and withstood a fast-finishing Bombers to win 11-21-87 to 10-7-67. Brisbane will host an elimination final in 2 weeks, while Essendon will miss the finals as the Bombers farewelled retiring great Dyson Heppell. The Storm have won the NRL minor premiership after thrashing the Dolphins 48 points to 6 in Melbourne in Nelson Asafa Solomona's 200th match. The hosts were up 22-0 at halftime and only needed to win to secure the title following Penrith's shock 4-point defeat to Canberra earlier. It's the club's 5th minor premiership in 8 seasons and 6th in total. The Dolphins slipped to 10th after their heaviest defeat of the season. The Knights kept their slim finals hopes alive with a 36 points to 16 win over South Sydney at Stadium Australia. Kalen Ponga, Dane Gagai and Jack Cogger starred for Newcastle, who joined the Raiders, Broncos, Dolphins and Dragons in the chase for 8th spot. The Rabbitohs remain in 15th. McLaren's Lando Norris has set the fastest time in qualifying at Formula One's Dutch Grand Prix, edging out championship leader Max Verstappen. Norris's teammate Oscar Piastri will start from 3rd on the grid, while fellow Australian Daniel Ricciardo will line up in 16th for RB. Verstappen holds a 78-point lead over Norris in the driver standings. Tottenham has secured its first win of the Premier League season with a 4-0 victory at home over Everton. Spurs singer Son Heung-min slotted a double to keep Ange Postecoglou's side in 4th spot on the table. In other results, Erling Haaland scored a hat-trick as reigning champions Manchester City beat the newly promoted Ipswich Town 4-1. Arsenal defeated Aston Villa 2-0 and Fulham overcame Leicester City 2-1. João Pedro headed home a dramatic 95th minute winner for Brighton, who extended their perfect start to the season, downing Manchester United 2-1. Australian golfer Adam Scott is in the hunt for his first tournament win in over 4 years at the PGA's championship event in Colorado. After holding the lead at the midway point, the 44-year-old struggled with a 3rd round 74. It puts Scott at 11 under par for the tournament, 1 shot behind American leader Keegan Bradley. Fellow Australian Cam Davis is tied for 27th at 2 under. South Korean golfer Ji Shin holds the lead heading into the final round of the Women's British Open at St Andrews. The 2-time champion carded a 3rd round 67 to sit at 7 under for the tournament. She's 1 shot clear of defending champion Lilia Vu. Stephanie Kyriakou is the best placed Australian, sitting tied for 19th at even par.
The Paralympic flame has officially begun its journey to Paris ahead of the Games on Wednesday. The fire was lit at Stoke Mandeville Hospital in southern England, where the idea for the Games was born. The Paralympics were conceived by German doctor Ludwig Guttmann to help rehabilitate soldiers injured during the Second World War. The torch will now be passed in relays between 24 torchbearers in the UK on its way to Paris. Let's take a look at the weather now with Jessica Rendall.
Hello, let's start on the satellite, where cloud is covering much of the southeast thanks to a cold front that's bringing showers, storms and gusty winds to the region. High pressure is sending showers over the North Queensland coast. Clear skies over central parts though, with very warm easterly winds. Let's take a closer look around the country, starting in Queensland, where a sunny day is on the cards for pretty much the entire state, apart from some scattered showers along the coast north of Gladstone and for parts of the far southwest. It is unseasonably warm in Queensland today, with high fire danger in the west. In New South Wales, in the ACT, scattered showers across the southern inland and ranges. That'll spread east and north during the day. Thunderstorms possible for much of the inland areas this afternoon, and some of those could even be severe, with gusty winds and large hail forecast, so keep an eye on those warnings. Victoria is also in store for some gusty thunderstorms today. Scattered showers for much of the state, with destructive winds, large hail and heavy falls through central Victoria north of Melbourne. A warm day though, despite all of that rain, with temperatures well above average. Down in Tassie, another wet day across the state to round out a soggy weekend. There are several strong wind warnings out though, so check those if you live in a coastal area. Back on the mainland, South Australia is in store for a wet and windy day with some possible gusty thunderstorms across the south, 15 to 24 in Whyalla. In WA, some cloud about with possible showers over parts of the southern coast, damaging winds around Esperance and some hazardous surf conditions for the southwest. Up north, mostly sunny in the Territory, and it is unseasonably hot for this time of year, particularly in the south. High fire danger today for the Darwin, Adelaide River and Katherine areas. Let's look ahead now to tomorrow's forecast for the capital cities. A mostly sunny Monday for Brisbane, sunshine too for Sydney, a possible shower on the cards for Canberra, Melbourne and Hobart, rain for Adelaide and possibly for Perth, but not for Darwin, starting the week on a sunny 34 degrees.
Hundreds of sea lions have taken over a beach in Monterey, California, prompting local officials to close the area to people. While sea lions are often seen on certain beaches on the California coast, it's unclear why so many of them chose San Carlos Beach. The spectacle has drawn in massive crowds of people keen to snap a shot of the animals lounging by the water. And there's more on the ABC News app and, of course, on ABC iView too. I'm Ruby Cornish. Thank you for your company.